We've got your speaker is actually already signing on. Hello. So I think the speaker is already signing on to Zoom. So I'm going to try to just like say hi to him and get everything connected. I think I have my volume off. Let me fix that. Hello, can you hear me? Hello. Am I coming through? Wait, I think you're muted. Some other people waiting. Hello, can you hear me now?
Hello, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. All right, nice to meet you. So is it Dr. You'll have to forgive me, is it Krehbiel?
Yes.
Okay.
And you're Dr. Hagner, is that correct?
Yes.
Pleased to meet you.
Yes, likewise. So I take it you've been in contact with Saripata about this talk?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, she's actually 10 feet away from me now, trying to get into the Zoom as well. This is our first meeting, and I have not hosted a Zoom meeting before, so this is all a little bit new to me. But I think I have a screen that I can project you on, and I think I've got the audio working. So, okay, there we are. And then are we going to have the faculty at the other two sites signing in also?
Hi, Spada.
Hi, Dr. Krehbiel.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Just fine.
Okay. I'll just place this over here so you can kind of see us maybe.
Oh, yeah, okay,
Okay.
great. So I'll count on you to give me the signal about when I'm supposed to begin, or?
Yeah, I think our middle school is joining in just a second.
Okay.
Mrs. Yudi?
Pardon me?
I'm trying to see if Mrs. Yudi.
Okay.
Saripata, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
All right. I'm here. We're here.
Okay.
8 strong.
Wait, Dr. Krehbiel, we're just gonna wait until like 3:25 to start. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, people are kind of coming in slowly, so yeah.
Sure, that's fine.
Good. Oh, yeah, can you get that one? Okay, I'm going to try to test the audio on my main computer here. Right, could you just say something real quick, Dr. Krehbiel?
Okay, just testing.
All right. Oh, wait, I need to move here. All right, one more time.
Testing.
All right, I think, is that coming in through those speakers now?
I think so.
Because the speakers I have here are pretty loud, so it's hard for me to tell sometimes. Okay, but everyone can hear him fine. Okay. So were you going to do give like an introduction or? Okay.
Do you want me to just say like a little something right now?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so basically this is an introduction. So our club is again GuruTalks, and the aim is to have like each month we'll have different like speakers from different professional career fields and different study areas, and they'll come in and they'll talk about what they do, and they'll give out some advice for high schoolers like that and also middle schoolers as well. So our first guest speaker obviously is Dr. Krehbiel, and he was kind enough to share some of his time for us today. And he'll be talking about careers in the psychology and STEM fields. And he is from Bethel College in Kansas.
So are we ready to go?
Yes, I think we're ready.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sripada. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be a speaker on your in your new program. As you may know, I learned to know Sripada just a little bit in our Summer Science Institute, which occurred this past summer. One of the responsibilities that I've taken on at Bethel College for the past 22 years is to organize and usually to lead this 1 week summer research experience for high school students. So in the face of the pandemic, the last 2 years it has been online, and Sripada was a student who attended this past June, and so that's how we got in touch. Thought I might give you just a little background on the things that I've done, and I have a few slides that I can show to give you a little bit of a feel for the sort of research that I've worked on with students, and try not to take too much time and hope that you will have some questions, especially about opportunities in STEM fields and the kinds of things that that you might do to increase your likelihood of finding a career path. So the main focus for me for many years has been in neuroscience and psychology. So I have a graduate degree, as you may have read in the little blurb that is posted on your website, from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And in those days, in psychology departments, for the most part, programs that had a neuroscience emphasis were primarily doing animal research. And so early in my career, that's the sort of thing I did. I did a lot of experiments with laboratory rats, things having to do with learning and memory initially, eventually also spent a lot of time for my dissertation studying the maternal behavior of rat mothers. And then this gave rise eventually to some other opportunities in which I studied animals after I took my position at Bethel, I had some sabbaticals in which I did research primarily in France, and worked at an agricultural research station there, where a major aspect of their work was studying maternal behavior of sheep mothers, sheep and goats and cattle, but I worked primarily on sheep. So we did some experiments there that I thought were quite interesting. One of them in particular showing that the birth process itself for a mother sheep, a ewe, plays a critical role in starting off her behavior of care of the young. I suppose we might expect that would be the case, but it was actually not well understood by any means at that time. And so we demonstrated, I think, pretty clearly that in addition to hormonal changes that are involved in the onset of maternal behavior, the process of birth, just that stimulation plays a critical role in the onset of maternal behavior, especially in first-time mothers. I count it kind of a blessing that over the time that I've been a student and college faculty member, that some of the areas that I find most interesting are ones that have really developed very rapidly, and those are fields that have really flourished. So one example of a field like that is the study of health psychology, the ways in which psychology influences not only mental health, but health itself, physical health as well, and that mental health and physical health, as many of us know informally, there's a great deal of evidence to indicate that they are closely intertwined, and so understanding exactly how that works and the nervous and endocrine processes that lie behind that has been an area of major interest for me. And I teach a course and still have been teaching a course since I retired from full-time teaching that focuses on the biological psychology underlying health, especially, of course, in humans, although there's some animal studies that are kind of support that perspective. And so in the time that I've been teaching, a whole new set of opportunities for students and professionals has emerged, in which people are studying, researchers are studying how psychological factors influence people's physical health. And then also, of course, studying how psychological treatments can have benefit. And these come together in a number of remarkable ways. And so these are really important and interesting new developments for students. I've spent a lot of my time during my professional life as well in advising pre-health profession students. And so it has become more and more apparent that people who go into health professions really need a background in psychology because there's so many psychological processes that have a major impact on health. And more these are being widely recognized in medical schools and in other health professional schools. So that's been a part of my work that, I find it is really interesting to work with students on these issues. And frequently I find that medical students or pre-medical students are astonished to learn at the strong effects of psychological factors upon health, and sometimes find that those are among the most interesting things that they study as they prepare to go into medicine or other health professions. The a major development that occurred in neuroscience, and basically at about the same time. I date health psychology back to about 1980. And at about that same time, there was an area of neuroscience that was emerging also, and now referred to as cognitive neuroscience. Neuroscience itself began to take shape maybe 10 or 15 years earlier than that. Neuroscience was very focused in the 1970s, very focused on biochemistry and anatomy and neurophysiology. And part of the reason for that was that there were not a lot of good ways of actually measuring what was happening in the human brain. There were plenty of ways, of course, of studying brains of deceased people. In particular, it was of interest to do that if there was a brain injury and that person had some kind of noteworthy impairment. Then if you studied the anatomy of the brain after the person died, you begin to get some clues about which areas of the brain are responsible for different kinds of psychological function. And when I was a student in graduate school, there was a emerging wide recognition that some structures in the brain played a critical role in memory. And so you may have read about some of these early studies if you've taken a psychology course. Some of you, I assume, may have if you're in high school. So an area of the brain within the temporal lobe on each side of the brain, referred to as the hippocampus, when damaged, is known to cause memory loss. And so there was an emerging interest in that. And actually I did, when I was in graduate school, did studies on chemical changes that occurred in the hippocampus in animals, trying to understand what might be the basis of those memory effects. But beginning about 1980, it became feasible to study these kinds of phenomena in awake behaving people because of the emergence of a wide variety of new brain imaging methods. And there are quite a number of these different methods. One of them that emerged fairly early was positron emission tomography. This was in the 1980s. And there are a number of others as well. The one that is most widely used, I think, by psychologists or psychologists who take a neuroscientific approach is a method called functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. And I think many of you are acquainted with MRI. MRI being a method that can show structural properties of tissue. And some of you may even have had MRIs administered if you've had some sort of injury or something like that. Functional MRI is a little bit different in that it allows you to monitor. It appears that it's working by monitoring blood flow. And so you can monitor the blood flow of different parts of the brain. And that's a way of monitoring the function of different areas of the brain. So areas of the brain that are activated at a particular time have increased blood flow. And this shows up on functional magnetic resonance imaging. So that those kinds of brain imaging methods, as well as the development of earlier methods into a kind of brain imaging as well. And I'm thinking especially of the electroencephalogram, which dates back all the way to the late 1920s. But in the last, I would say 30 years or so, the technology for conducting electroencephalographic studies and analyzing the data has become so much better and so much more widely accessible that doing electroencephalographic work is actually feasible. I never learned how to do this as a graduate student. I wasn't in a lab where we did anything with human participants. But over the last 20 years or so, I've been working with our own system to measure electroencephalography or to do electroencephalographic studies in which we're basically measuring brain electrical activity while people are doing interesting tasks. And then we use a method of analysis that is referred to as event-related potentials, which averages together the results from many trials and averages across participants to reveal patterns showing how people are responding to particular stimuli, which did not used to be very feasible because there's so much going on in the brain at one time that the activity in the electroencephalogram is sometimes very difficult to tease apart. Well, so those are some things that were happening. So I was delighted to see these opportunities, both for me and my students in cognitive neuroscience on the one hand, and in health psychology on the other. And those were an important part of my teaching, but also an important part of the research that I did with students. And I think they are important aspects of what people who are studying psychology or neuroscience can aspire to. I think there are a lot of emerging opportunities in these fields, and I really encourage students to get involved. But of course, they're both also highly relevant to any health professional interest. So I've always worked to try to get students who have interest in health professions to get some background in neuroscience. I think it is highly relevant, and certainly some background in health psychology. Okay, so let me just share my screen here for a moment and show you. Let's see, can you enable screen sharing for someone other than the host? If you can't, that's okay, and I can just talk about it, but I should have asked about this before we began.
You should be able to now.
Okay, let me give it a try. Yes. Okay. So here are some displays and other kinds of some displays, graphs, and so on that show some of what I've done with students over the years. In particular, and I haven't mentioned this yet, about 20 years ago, I got interested in the possibility of studying responses to music. And I kind of got into this indirectly by thinking about other problems. When you study health psychology, you realize that the kinds of emotional experiences that people have a major impact on their health. And so it becomes really interesting to be able to study human responses, physiological responses, and psychological responses to various kinds of stimuli, and trying in particular to, in effect, to bring emotion into the laboratory. Obviously, it's always easier to do these things in the laboratory. And one of the things about studies in the laboratory is that they are emotionally kind of impoverished, and you have to look for ways of eliciting authentic emotion in the lab if you're going to study emotion in the laboratory. Well, one way to do that is to study responses to videos, and that's not a bad thing to do. Actually, maybe I'll make this full screen so you can see it a little bit better. It's not a bad thing to do that. However, video is an extremely complex stimulus, and so to me, it always seemed like not the best place to start. I would rather be able to study something that is a little more manageable. And became aware with some encouragement from some colleagues that music is a really, it can be quite an emotionally compelling thing, even in the laboratory. And so began to study psychological and physiological responses to music. Here are some data that were gathered by a student not almost 20 years ago by now, I guess. Studies in which the student was measuring emotional response, and we had a way of measuring emotional response in an ongoing fashion, and simultaneously then measuring physiological responses. And in these two graphs, we're looking at responses to two different pieces of music. And we have a psychological measure, which is labeled here activation. You can see it on the vertical axis on the left of each graph. On the right-hand side, you can see an axis labeled skin conductance, measured in units that you might not be familiar with, microsiemens. And an interesting thing about these two very different pieces, I don't know if any of you are acquainted with John Coltrane, a major jazz composer, performer of the 1960s, I guess, maybe early 70s. I think he died maybe in 1970 or so. And then here's a piece by a person, composer, Argentine composer named Astor Piazzolla. And Piazzolla is famous for bringing the tango dance music into classical music. And so this is a tango piece, and then this is a jazz piece. One of the things that I found peculiar is that this measure of skin conductance, and skin conductance is kind of a general measure of kind of physiological activation. It's if you're acquainted with the structure of the autonomic nervous system, skin conductance is a measure that seems to tap it taps the perspiration responses, the activity of the sweat glands. And so it is a measure of activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Here you can see a rather similar response. These two are pattern of response in these two blue curves for these two very different pieces of music, as though there's an initial activation and then it kind of goes away as the person becomes accustomed to the music. The actual reported psychological activation, though, takes a very different pattern. I had gone into these studies assuming that these two kinds of measures would be very correlated with each other, and it turns out that they aren't necessarily correlated with each other at all. So that was a bit of a surprise, but what it illustrates is the kinds of things that you can do in measuring simultaneously psychological and physiological response. Here's another example of a study like this. This was a study done by one of our students who graduated about 15 years ago, who was comparing especially music chosen by the experiment participant with a piece by the Russian composer Rachmaninoff, a very, very peaceful kind of calming kind of piece, at least it would seem that way, and then just plain silence. And notice that in all of these cases, we're looking at excerpts of music that take about a couple of minutes or so, or a minute and a half to 2 minutes. You can see, let's see, the light blue curves are for the discipline chosen music. The Rachmaninoff is the pink, and the silence is the green. You can see that for these different measures, here we have, this is that activation measure that we were looking at a moment ago. Here is another psychological measure, how pleasant people found the music to be. In any case, it appears that that participant chosen music, it produces a very different response than the Rachmaninoff does. Although people tend to choose music because of its calming effects on them, but it had a very different effect than that music that was chosen by the experimenter, and also very different from silence on a number of these measures. So yeah, I mean, these are just the example findings, but and these are averaged, these curves are averaged over about 20 participants. And the ones in the previous study were averaged over quite a few participants as well. Well, so this is a photograph taken just a few years ago showing preparation for an EEG study. And one of the main reasons I wanted to show you this is the cap that is worn by the participant. And by the way, as I look at a couple of these people, I realize, oh, now they're medical students. So I mean, it's fun to see students who studied neuroscience at one point and then went on to medical school. Well, in any case, this cap is a kind of a standard tool in positioning electrodes on a person's head as we are preparing to study their brain electrical responses. You can see each of these little bumps is an electrode. You can see the cable with the various leads that are eventually going to be plugged into an amplifier, which is actually in the adjacent room. And these caps are very useful tools because they give us a relatively reproducible way of positioning the electrodes on the scalp. And the part of the process of preparation involves using a little syringe to inject into the space between the electrode and the person's scalp and it's just putting it in that space, a conducting gel, so we can pick up the electrical response. There are very weak electrical responses on the scalp of a person, but here using, it's actually about a million-fold amplification when all is said and done, we're able to pick up electrical activity within the brain. Here you get a sense of the kind of results that you can get. I mentioned earlier that technique called event-related potentials. This is work that was done by a student who just a couple of years ago, I guess, or a year and a half ago, completed her PhD at the University of Texas, Austin in cognitive neuroscience and social psychology. And she did this study in which she looked at differences in response between words that have been found to be learned early in life as compared to words that are learned maybe later, like in adolescence or in adulthood. And here you're looking at two of those kinds of response. Let's see, I'm not entirely sure if you can see what you can see and what you can't here. LVF here refers to the left visual field. RVF refers to the right visual field. You can see that there are 4 curves here. These are responses that we're recording simultaneously. This is from a particular electrode called T7. And so if we look at this cap again, T7 is about right there. Can you see my pointer? Can you see my mouse pointer? Dr. Hagner, could you just tell?
Yes, we can. We can see everything that's on the screen.
Okay, so that's T7. That's kind of above the temporal lobe. T8 would be on the opposite side of the head, above the temporal lobe on the left. And the other electrodes we're going to take a look at are C4, which is about right there, CZ, which is at the very top of the head, and then C3, which is on the other side of the person's head. Well, so what you can see here is that responses to the presentations in the left visual field produced a positive deviation here on average, and this is averaged over about 30 participants, I think, whereas those that were presented in the right visual field produced a negative wave. That's in that one electrode T7, that is the electrode that is, I'm sorry, I said the T7 was there. T7 is actually on the left. The one we were looking at was T8. So here you have what we get with T7. And here you see that with T8, we get quite the opposite response, right? So we're getting those pathways, those visual pathways cross. And when we measure those effects very, very quickly, within milliseconds, and the scale here on the horizontal axis is in thousandths of a second, the scale on the vertical axis is in microvolts. You can see that those very different responses at different electrodes are preserved. Here you might notice also that that C3 and C4 are, this one is C3, this one C4. You can see that they're kind of opposite each other as well, right? So the green and red traces here are lower, and the blue and black traces here are lower. And remember, the difference between the green and red and the blue and black are that one is in the left visual field, the other, and that is the stimuli were in the left visual field, and the others were in the right visual field. And CZ is right on the midline, and here you can see that all the curves lie just almost right on top of each other. So you see, very different responses in different at different electrodes, but you also see that by these measures, there is very little detectable difference between responses to words learned early and words learned late, which isn't exactly what we expected, but it was interesting to see nonetheless. Okay, and then one last thing. In the last few years, I've been working with students in studying, we started out studying concussions and basically responses to brain injury in sports. Eventually, we began to look at, because there's a lot of evidence, as I'm sure many of you know, a lot of evidence that concussions can have a very severe impact, both psychological and physical impact on a person. Can have long duration health and mental health effects. We began to try to understand why people continued to participate. And initially, we did some studies in which we tried to use informational interventions to try to help students understand what the risks are. Found that those appeared to have very little impact on their attitude. We moved instead then to trying to understand what their values are and what their motivations are in pursuing sports. And among other things, what we found, and I suppose it's in some ways it may be obvious enough that this is the case, students were clearly evaluating the benefits, the joys, the pleasant things, like being able to participate, being able to enjoy crowds, to please their coaches, to please their teammates, and so on. They found those things that are enjoyable to be much more compelling than they found the risks. But in addition, we found some among college students. We found some interesting male-female differences. So here you can see we composed this risk score. And so you can see that males tended to evaluate the risks lower than so male college students, men evaluated those risks as lower than women athletes did. By contrast, the enjoyment score, although there's some rather severe outliers here, if you've had a statistics class and looked at these kinds of graphs, you would appreciate this. You can see that in spite of that, it looks like the men tended to have a considerably higher enjoyment score than the women did. So there's some interesting sex differences here among college students. We've done a fairly extensive study. Actually, this was in collaboration with some former Summer Science Institute students using high school students, high school athletes as participants. And there actually, we don't find very much of a gender difference. And so we're kind of wondering at this point whether there might be some emerging hesitation about these risks, perhaps in women as they move from high school to college. Well, I think I ought to stop with that. I'm gonna stop this sharing and ask what questions you may have, and especially questions about opportunities that you think are might be in STEM fields, but also you're welcome to ask about the research that we've done and about the Summer Science Institute that we hold, any of those things, whatever you want to ask. Be interested to hear your questions. Anyone?
Yeah. So basically what I wanted to say is that
Do I need to?
does anyone have questions right now?
We're getting some feedback here. I can mute myself.
Wait, so do we have any questions in the middle?
I'm sorry, Sripad, am I supposed to be?
Oh, hello.
I'm not understanding you.
Okay,
Did you have a
So-
question, Sripad?
yeah, so I was just gonna say, I was just gonna ask you, so as like a general question, so we can start. Can you, like, you mentioned graduate school and research in graduate school a lot. So
Uh-huh.
can you explain, you know, what's like, what the kind of pathway is, like after college and like, can you kind of just like outline that really quickly, please? That'd be great.
Oh, I'm not sure I've quite understood the question yet. So you're interested in what are the steps to prepare for graduate school that are needed, or?
Yeah, that, and also just what is graduate school in general?
Yeah, so there are a lot of, I would say for the majority of STEM careers, you have to plan on going beyond a bachelor's degree. That isn't universally the case. There are certainly things that students do with bachelor's degree in some fields. In psychology, we find that certainly students who graduate with psychology majors can get gainful employment, but the kinds of jobs that you can get with a bachelor's degree in psychology are not usually ones that students want to do for a long time, graduates want to do for a long time. They're more like stepping stones, helping to think through directions that you may eventually want to take if you pursue a graduate degree. Now, that's not true in all STEM fields, certainly. So we are having a symposium on our campus here in about a month, a little over a month, in which a number of our chemistry graduates will talk about opportunities that are available to students who graduate with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. And I think there are some pretty significant and attractive opportunities with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. And especially so if you learn how to use analytical instruments. There are a lot of instruments that you can learn to use as a part of an undergraduate degree in chemistry, and those really provide a lot of skills that are in demand in the job market. So there are jobs like that, I think, for people who are interested in biotechnology or well, certainly engineering, and Dr. Hegner, I'm sure can tell you much more about that than I can. There are opportunities at the bachelor's level. But in areas like biology and psychology, neuroscience, and a great deal of chemistry, graduate school is more the norm. There are teaching careers, certainly in most of these areas. There's less, I think, less teaching opportunity in psychology than there would be in biology and chemistry and physics. But there are some psychology teaching opportunities in high school as well. And so those are indeed things that you can do with a bachelor's degree. If you're going to pursue graduate study, if you want to go on and become a researcher or become a health professional, then you need to be thinking about going on beyond a bachelor's degree. And there, typically, it's important to have a. In general, I think it's wise to have a background that extends beyond just a particular discipline. So there are a lot of fields that have an interdisciplinary component these days. So many chemists, for example, are working in some aspect of biological chemistry. Many psychologists are working in some aspect of biological psychology or neuroscience. Biologists are often working with people who have a chemistry background or have some other science background. So it's good to have more than just one discipline. And I think it's always a good thing to have as much background in mathematics as you can. I think mathematics background is a strength. It's not that you have to have a lot for a fair number of areas, but if you have it, it's helpful. Let's see, what else? So when you think about applying for a graduate school or some kind of professional school, that's kind of a major process in itself. And it's really, it's important to devote quite a bit of time to that. You don't have, when you go into college, you don't have to know what area of health you're going to go into if you want to do a health career, or exactly what area of some discipline you're going to go into. Those are things that you can work on gradually as you are going through your college career. But you do need to zero in on something before you can actually apply to graduate school or to, I don't know, a medical school or physical therapy school or, whatever. And so the application process can be a fairly extensive thing. And in general, no matter where you're going as an undergraduate, you will be applying for further study if you're going on beyond a bachelor's degree. There are some exceptions to that, but they're not very numerous. I think in general, it's a good idea to get a solid background in the STEM field before you go on to one of these fields. And I don't know, Dr. Hagner, you may have other comments about that.
I was actually kind of coming up with another question to kind of follow up on that. You were talking about, having a chemistry undergrad, for instance, before going into something like clinical psychology. Is there a certain sort of class of undergraduate majors that would be sort of appropriate for someone who wants to go into clinical psychology, or would literally any STEM field be appropriate, or is there some way to narrow that down?
So clinical psychology is a particular aspect of psychology that is a little bit peculiar. I
probably misspoke, actually. Let me take out the word clinical. I just like psychology or neuroscience more generally.
Okay. Because clinical psychology, just to finish up on that, those are people who are going into clinical are going to be working in providing therapy for people who have mental health issues, or they may in fact be clinical psychologists, could be health psychologists, or even neuropsychologists, in which case their having background in the STEM field would be highly relevant. In the case of psychology more generally, so I mean, there are multiple areas of psychology at the graduate level. So people go into, as I've indicated, cognitive neuroscience, or there is also cognitive psychology or cognitive science. There is developmental psychology is another major field. There is the study of personality and of social psychology. All of those are somewhat distinguishable fields at the graduate level. Some of them are much more biologically oriented than others are. So if you're going to go into cognitive neuroscience or into health psychology, I think a background in chemistry or biology would be highly valued. If you're going into social psychology, it might still be quite valuable, but there would be a lot of people who go into those fields who wouldn't necessarily have that background. I don't know if is that covering what you were asking about?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Yes, Sripada.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Krehbiel. So I'm just gonna ask the middle schoolers if they have any questions.
Can you speak just a little louder? I can't quite hear you.
I'm just gonna ask.
You get feedback, don't you?
I'm just gonna ask the middle schoolers if they have any questions really quick. So, Mrs. Uni, does anyone over there have any questions?
I keep pushing the wrong button. I don't believe so at this time. Thank you, Sripada.
Okay.
One other thing that I wanted to emphasize for both middle schoolers and high schoolers is that I think there are just so many opportunities these days that you can take advantage of that are outside of the regular classroom setting in your high schools or middle school. And I think that students who do this, and our Summer Science Institute is an example of this. I'm sure Sripada can tell you more about her experiences, but actually I did want to show you one thing that might give you some ideas. Dr. Hagner, is it okay if I share my screen again for just a moment?
Sure.
Let's see here, if I can get to the right one. Okay, so are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to show you this because I think it's those of you who might be looking for opportunities, especially summer opportunities, but at other times, I think this site called pathwaystoscience.org, and I don't know, Sripada, if you may have actually used this yourself, this really helps you find opportunities for summer activities, kind of things that are really important in helping you understand what you might be able to do in STEM fields without, the things that you can't do in sort of in the everyday classroom. So notice that there are some programs for K-8 students. So those of you in middle school might find some interesting things here. They're scattered all over the country, but you might find some that are online. And so things that you could do fairly at a fairly modest cost. And then there are programs for high school students. And actually you'll see our Summer Science Institute linked here near the top of that page. I think these represent really important things that can introduce you to the kinds of things that are available in sciences and in math. And another thing that I wanted to be sure to mention is that coding is so important these days in so many fields. So if you can get some experience in use of some kind of computing language, that's really super helpful. It's applicable in just about any field of science these days. And of course, there are opportunities just within those fields themselves. So, software development or other aspects of computer science, and obviously also mathematics. There are just a whole lot of interesting opportunities. So I'm happy to answer other questions if there are any. This is a great site, Pathways to Science. Sripada, did you use this one? Do you recall using it?
Yeah, I recall using this website.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, please talk it up.
Yeah, for sure.
Any other questions?
I was actually going to just like make a recommendation. I don't know if you have other things to add to this, but I was just going to say for anybody who thinks they might be interested in this field and might want to like look into some reading, there's actually a couple of books that I have read on this topic of neuroscience that I think are very good. One of them is The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks.
Oh, yeah.
He was a clinical psychologist, correct? Is that what he was?
He was
A
a
neurologist?
neurologist, I think. I think he was a neurologist.
So yeah,
He's passed away now, but yeah.
Yeah, that book is very, very famous. It's pretty interesting. And there's another one, I think it's more recent, by a guy named Sam Keen. It's called The Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons.
I don't know that one.
Dr. Krehbiel was mentioning earlier that in the past, if you wanted to study the brain, you would typically only study the brains of deceased people who had prominent injuries or other interesting pathologies. And this book is basically a history of the field of neuroscience. It focuses on a lot of famous case studies. Like there's a guy named Phineas Gage, who was a railroad worker who had a railroad spike explode through his skull, survived, and was studied pretty extensively after that. A couple of notable presidential assassins were found to have various forms of brain damage, like the person who assassinated William McKinley and James Garfield, where their brains were later studied. So it's a lot of sort of historical anecdotes about sort of the history of neuroscience that I also thought was very interesting. So I think they're like accessible to a high school audience. So if anyone is interested in those books, you might check them out.
There are lots of good books that are for a wide audience in neuroscience, and so if I'd be happy to dig up some other recommendations if for people who may be interested.
Yeah, that would be great, Dr. Krehbiel. Yeah. So yeah, like just last call. Does anyone have any questions? It doesn't really have to be specifically about the topic. You can ask about, as Dr. Krehbiel said, like opportunities in the STEM fields, like extracurriculars that you can do, anything of that sort. Okay. Yeah.
Just to follow up on what Sripada just said, I mean, I think doing extracurricular things in sciences is really beneficial. It gives you another view of what science and math and technology are all about. And so yeah, doing things that go beyond the regular classroom, I think is very valuable. And come to Summer Science Institute. We'd love to have you.
Like after the call? We can if you'd like to.
Sure, yeah. So Dr. Krehbiel, we were just thinking about like taking kind of like a picture together. So we have you presented on the board right now, so you don't really need to kind of move or anything for the picture.
Okay.
But yeah, everyone here, it would be great if you guys could like kind of just stand in your front, I guess. And we can kind of take a picture and put it on the website for our first session. Yeah.
I'm so impressed that you've organized something like this. It's pretty amazing to me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
Okay. Yeah. Anyone wants to come up and say hi?
And Sripita, you'll send me a copy of the picture, right?
Yeah, I will. I'll make sure to do it. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Krehbiel. That was really
Sure.
good talk. I definitely really found the examples of research that you showed us. They were really cool, especially the responses to music that you showed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was really cool. Yeah, we'll make sure to post that on the website as well. But thank you so much again. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. And I enjoyed talking to your students. Pretty amazing to have a organization for high school students like this. So it's really a really good thing.